We have Dr. Nell Duke here with us today. It's such an honor and a privilege. And thank you, Nell, for squeezing us in because we know how incredibly busy you are and that this truly is, it just tells us how much you value the work that you do in Michigan and the coaches in this network, that you have kept us on your agenda with all the work you're doing for the University of Michigan and in your new position at Stand for Children. So welcome, and we appreciate you now. I'll hand it off to you now.
Great. Thanks so much, Annie. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you, many familiar faces. And I hope that everyone is having a great fall. Normally, as you know, I've always liked to listen in on the whole day so I can be responsive, and I wasn't able to do that this time and not sure I'm going to be able to do that going forward. So apologies if I'm being ignorant of things that were said or things that I could connect to. I normally would do that, but just can't. But today's hour or not quite an hour, is meant to be an opportunity to really just talk informally. So I don't have a big slide deck to present to you all. I'm going to address a set of questions that you've raised. Again, just informally, just talking. And then I'm going to welcome other questions that I will do my best to answer extemporaneously. So without further ado, I'll go to the first question. The first one had to do, or the first one I'm going to address was, is there a set time period where something is considered fully researched? And that's a really great question. And I think the answer is no. Scientists don't tend to think of anything as sort of ever fully researched, because we're always, trying to find new and more detailed, information. So you might think, some paleontologists might think that some aspect of, dinosaur skeletons or something is fully researched, and then some new technology comes along that allows us to learn something about those bones that we didn't know before, and so on. So I don't think there's ever really a time that things are fully researched. I think that the probably part of the intent behind that question, though, was sort of like, how much research is enough for you to feel confident? And that's a terrific question. And I think that folks who don't spend a lot of time out in real schools and real classrooms with real kids would probably say something like, there should be a substantial weight of evidence before you base anything on a given research finding. I don't think of it that way because I spend so much time, in schools and classrooms and with kids. And my theory is basing a decision on one study is better than basing it on 0 studies. So I take a sort of, I call it a best guess, right? I just take a best guess sort of philosophy. So let me give you an example. You've probably seen a lot of this pattern, not just in Michigan, it's all over the country now, where they're doing departmentalization in kindergarten through 2nd grade. So kids go to different teachers for different subjects in kindergarten through 2nd grade. The most common model of it that I'm seeing is where reading and social studies, or literacy and social studies, are combined, and math and science are combined. So the kids go to one teacher for social studies and literacy, and go to a different teacher for math and science. And then they go to their different specials teachers as well. So that's called departmentalization, or platooning is another way that I've heard it referred to, or specialization. So we actually don't have a lot of research on this. To my knowledge, we only have one randomized controlled trial, which is, where you're really randomly assigning kids to different models, and gives us really strong causal evidence. And then a little, I think it's 2 correlational studies that have looked at this in any kind of depth that I'm aware of. So that's not a very good research base. That's as far from fully researched almost as you can get, right? Without no research. But what choice do we have as educators? This is something that's on our plates right now. You as coaches may be right now asked to weigh in on this very subject. So what do? My opinion is that you use your best guess based on the research we do have, and of course, through the lens of your own experience and data collection and so forth. But so far, it looks like that's not very good for kids to do departmentalization or platooning at K2. So how I would handle that is, yes, there's more research needed, but based on the amount of research we have right now, I would recommend against specialization or platooning. So that's how I'd answer that question about fully researched. I don't know who asked it, so please definitely, put in the chat if I didn't quite get to it and you have a follow-up, and I can try to answer it. In the chat, what about grades 3 to 5? So the randomized controlled trial that was done, and the lead author of that was Roland Fryer, Fryer. And there is a free version of the study that appeared in, I think, American Economic Review, but there's a free, like a working paper version. And it has the words pupil factory in the title. So if you search Roland Fryer pupil factory, I think you'll get it. Anyway, in his study, it was K5 actually that they tested it. And it didn't look good even at 3 to 5. But I'm sorry, I sometimes fail to pay attention to upper elementary grades. So I actually don't remember in the correlational research if 3 to 5 or 4 to 5 was investigated. So I'd have to get back to you on that one. Thank you, Emily. Great. So another question that was asked was about Hattie's effect sizes and like how to interpret them and what to make of them. It's not that I haven't thought about how to answer this, but I still don't really know how to answer this. So I think that what Hattie's effect sizes can do for you is give you some like broad categories of things to look into more, but I wouldn't base anything on Hattie's effect sizes alone. And the reason for that is because the categories in his analyses are very broad. And so a lot of different kinds of practices and so forth can end up lumped under one like category, where as coaches, you're really in the weeds, so you can't really work in broad categories. That's not how your jobs are structured, right? You are really looking at details of practice. The other thing about Hattie's effect sizes, and this is true of meta-analyses, not just his, but just in general as a caution, is like you really want to consider the measure when you're thinking about the effect size. And so, for example, it's easy to get a pretty big bump in alphabet knowledge. Like we can get really pretty hardy effect sizes in alphabet knowledge. And it's quite hard to get big effect sizes in norm reference standardized tests of reading achievement. And it's quite hard to get changes in state reading tests, like, like MSTEP or something. Actually, very few studies even try to do that, truth be told. So when you mix those up, an effect size can look larger, but it's larger because some of the measures were easier to get effects on, you know what I'm saying? Or it can look smaller. It's just mixing up like a lot of different, it's like apples and oranges, and then you're putting all the apples and oranges together and trying to get like the mean fruit, which it's like, that's not a good metaphor, but it just doesn't work that well. So my recommendation to you would be when you look at the Hattie work and there's something that's important to you, for example, let's say that you're looking at it and you see an effect size that is reported based on PBL. That's one of the items. The next thing that I would do from there, if that's what you're really interested in, is I would dig narrower. So I would go into Google Scholar, which you've all seen us, do many times in these sessions. And I would like narrow down grade level, and I would look, I would search problem-based learning, but I also search project-based learning and like other terms you've heard, performance learning, whatever. And I'd put those in, and I'd really read some abstracts, read 10, 20 abstracts, or you can also get abstracts from Hattie's work directly, but and I'd really try to like get into the details more. And so then you'll find some really interesting things. For example, like the effects of problem-based learning and project-based learning turn out to be different, and the difference between some kinds of project-based learning and other kinds of project-based learning, they have massively different effect sizes. And then you'll see that there are different effect sizes at different age groups. And so I think you have to take that additional step or set of steps after the Hattie to get down to the level of detail that is going to be useful to you all in the work you're doing, which isn't broad policy work, right? It's really, in the classroom daily practice work. But the question might have also been asking for a simpler answer of just like, what's a big effect size? So traditionally, the size of an effect does depend on what statistical method is used to generate the effect size in the first place. And there's like, can't even imagine how many research articles are published every year that are statisticians discussing how to compute effect sizes and arguing about different effect sizes and how do you do effect sizes in multi-level designs. And well, I mean, it's a whole thing. Anyway, so sort of traditionally in like a Cohen's D, which is a common type of effect size you'll see reported, traditionally, if it's like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, we think that's pretty small. Like, might be meaningful. You have to look at what the substance of the measures is, but kind of small. We think of moving into 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, that we would think of as like moderate, or a medium effect size. And then when we get up to 0.7 and above, we think of that as a large effect size. That's kind of a general rule for Cohen's D. Something that, Hattie does is he actually has like picked a point on his meter where he says like, below this, it's kind of not worth your time. And above this, it is worth your time. And so his effect size approach is just a little bit different, but it sort of maps on. And he's looking for sort of high, low to medium and above effect sizes in his meter. Anyway, so when you're looking at a reported effect sizes, that could be a good rule of thumb for you in terms of what's a small, medium, or large. But again, I want to remind you, you want to know what the measure is, and you want to know the substantive importance, and you want to know things like cumulativeness. So for example, the effect sizes for summer reading aren't huge, but if you do summer reading programs with kids 3 years in a row, then you add it up, the effect from 1 year and the effect from another year and the effect from another year. So you want to think about things like that. And you also want to think of, sometimes an effect is, you're deciding between one of two approaches. Like when I talked about, the last week, it compared look, say, cover, write, check, fix, look, say, cover, write, check, fix, that sort of procedure for spelling words. Where the kids look at the word and then they cover it up and then they try to write it and then they check to see if they spelled it correctly and then they fix anything that was wrong and then they go to the next word. Anyway, this study compared that approach to spelling to a different approach to spelling where you taught kids, phonologically or graphophonologically based spelling rules, like consonant doubling and things like that. And they saw which one was better. And the phonological, more spelling rules oriented approach was more effective than look, say, cover, write. The effect wasn't big. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was not big. But on the other hand, if you're going to do something, even if the effect's not big, you might as well do the thing that's at least a little bit more effective. You know what I mean? So that's again where I think for those of us who spend a lot of time in classrooms, we're kind of filtering research through a little bit of a different lens where we're always just trying to see like, what's the little bit that I can do here and there to make things a little bit better, that if you incrementally, take all these improvements together over time, children are doing much better. That helps. Okay. Janine has a question back to the departmentalization or platooning. Was there grouping by skill or needs? I don't know the answer to your question. I do know that in the research design, they matched the teachers to the thing that they were better at teaching based on previous test scores. Like, so they made sure that the teachers who are best at teaching ELA got the ELA and social studies group, did the ELA and social studies and not the math and science. That's kind of an interesting little tidbit, but in terms of what they did within that, I mean, this was an experiment where the only thing they were altering was the platooning or departmentalization. They weren't trying to reform other aspects of classroom instruction, so that they'd only be testing just the effects of the departmentalization or platooning. That helps. Okay, great. So Shelley, yeah, okay, good. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
There are 3 sections of 4th grade. So is there any research to support lows moving with one teacher, mediums moving with one teacher, and highs moving with one teacher within that grade level? Is there any research out there to
So
support?
you're asking like essentially ability grouping?
Correct. Like the low is the smallest group, where the middle is a little bit bigger and the high group is really big, depending on where the teachers are at to hit.
Yeah, sure.
Or like an RTI time.
Yeah. So it's a part of the day. So kids are in heterogeneous or mixed classrooms, and then for one part of the day, they're grouped by ability.
Correct. For their response to intervention time, for that 30 minutes at the end of the day, they move from their heterogeneous classroom to ability-based classrooms with a specific strategy. I didn't know if there was any research out there on that or not.
Okay, good question. There's a lot of layers there. So, so I'll just say for the record that I'm glad it wasn't the first thing I thought you were saying, which is like all year, there's a classroom for the kids who are, lower performing and than middle. So thank you for clarifying that, because that would be really worrisome. I don't know of research that's only looked at that. So that is part of Success for All, for example, in Walk to Read. And there have been certainly studies of Success for All, but to my knowledge, they haven't just pinpointed that one thing, right? So I don't know of studies that have isolated just that, but I can tell you where that makes sense and where it doesn't. I think extrapolating from research. So kids who are perceived at the same level of achievement in reading may be at that level of achievement for very different reasons, right? So you can have 2 kids who are in 3rd grade and they're reading at an early 2nd grade level. And for one of them, it could be because they have very poor decoding that may be due to, maybe due to an underlying phonemic awareness issue. It may be that they didn't get yet very good phonics and spelling instruction. It may be that they're really having trouble like storing the orthographic representations of words. I mean, there's actually like a whole bunch just even within that, but let's just broadly take that kid who's having difficulty and below grade level, probably because of decoding based issues. And then you could take another kid where they're also reading it at sort of early 2nd grade level, even though they're in 3rd grade. And it really has to do with vocabulary, content knowledge, maybe an underlying language impairment, syntactic processing, etc. Those kids need very different interventions. So they shouldn't be in the same intervention group. So doing intervention groups by ability or level is not consistent with what we understand about intervention and reading difficulty. So it would make much more sense would be to say, we're going to have a group that's going to work really, really hard on vocabulary. And we're going to do a vocabulary intervention for this group because we think that's like the next biggest thing that this group needs to work on. And then we're going to have this other group. And, for these kids, there's clearly a lot of work that needs to be done at the level of phonemic awareness. And so we're going to do a research tested phonemic awareness intervention with children in this group for this period of time. And it's not like you don't have them work on anything else. You're still going to make sure like everybody's getting to read and everybody's getting to work on fluency and, but you kind of target or tailor the figure ground or the emphasis in the intervention based on what that particular child needs. So I would say, based on the research that I know of, I wouldn't use reading achievement per se as how I would group kids. I would use the instructional need that you have identified and the instructional strength that you have identified. Okay, boy, the chat is a light here. Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sort of, to be honest, answering questions with a lot of different studies in my mind. So that's going to be a tricky one, Joey Lynn, for me to list all the studies that would, for example, lead me to the response I just. Okay, so thank you for that follow-up. It was based on a phonics screener. So yeah, so I wouldn't be doing grouping based just on a phonics screener. Well, first of all, you don't want to be probably grouping just based on a screener at all, if it's truly a screener. So that would be the first thing to figure out, right? And then second of all, once you have, you know, an assessment that is meant to be more diagnostically accurate than a screener, then I would not just use phonics, because there's so many other, you know, things that, as you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but as you know, there are so many other things that impact our ability for children to be, you know, proficient readers and writers on MSTEP in third grade. So I would say the first thing I would do is try to work toward getting more information, and that could be based both on assessments, but also based on what teachers are seeing in classrooms, which is also a valid, you know, form of data, assuming that teachers, you know, have a level of expertise about reading and writing that they're bringing to bear when they're observing kids. Okay. Okay. So I want to make sure I get to another of the questions that was submitted ahead of time. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll loop back to the chat. So the third question that was submitted to me was actually kind of a bunch of questions in one, but it really had to do with why I've said some things I've said about high frequency word instruction. I guess that's how I would broadly summarize it. So the questions were like, why am I saying no high frequency word instruction in pre-kindergarten classrooms? Why am I saying, you know, not too much high frequency word instruction in kindergarten? And why am I saying that first grade is a time to really explode with your high frequency word instruction? So it was those three were all together in the question. And those are really great questions. And like most things, it might be that we have a different answer in 10 years, but based on the research that we have now, here's what I would say. So the reason that we don't focus on high frequency word learning in pre-kindergarten is because developmentally children need to sort of have some things in place before high frequency word instruction is going to be very efficient. That's one reason. What they need to have in place is at least initial phoneme segmentation, which is something we're still working on in pre-K, right? The Head Start Outcomes Framework 2015 expects initial phoneme segmentation by the end of 60 months of age. So by 60 months, they should be able to pull that first sound off of a word. So they need that for high frequency word instruction to be very efficient. They need to know most of their alphabet, which is also not necessarily the case in pre-K, right? So research suggests that our goal by end of pre-K is for kids to know kind of like 2/3 or so of the alphabet. So they, you know, they're still working on their alphabet learning. So it seems like an premature to work on high frequency word instruction. And then a third thing that seems to be important is to have a concept of word. So to be pretty proficient at breaking the speech stream into words, and also at being able to recognize in print, you know, that space in print is signaling that there's a new word. So, and that's another thing that we're still working on in pre-K. Actually, we're still working on concept of word into kindergarten. And so to have not have those in place, but be teaching high frequency words, it's going to be pretty efficient. And it's definitely got a cart before the horse kind of feel to it to me. So that's like one cluster of arguments. I think a second cluster of arguments is simply that high frequency words in English tend to be function words. So they're just not very exciting. So if you're taking kids, particularly kids who may come from homes where literacy isn't necessarily like brought up explicitly in front and center literacy in the sense of print literacy, reading and writing. You know, to have their sort of first introduction to this big task of learning to read and write be words like the, was, and said, it just like, you know, I don't necessarily know of research on this, but it just strikes me as off base that that's how you're, you know, ushering kids into the world of reading and writing. And a third kind of related issue to that is that it is the case in English, although we have many high frequency words in English that are entirely predictable based on the way they're spelled, like can, right? Very predictable. Can, spelled just as you would think it would be. We have lots of high frequency words in English that aren't. And so when you're just trying to give kids a sense of confidence in our code, you're just trying to help them understand that, like, it's pretty predictable that when you see the letter B, it probably represents the sound. That's not a great time to be inundating them with all these words that are spelled oddly based on what we know of the English alphabet. So that's why I think high frequency word instruction in preschool doesn't make a lot of sense. I know that there are kids, my daughter learned to read, you know, she was reading proficiently at 3. You know, there are those kids out there. And so for those kids, you might say, well, why couldn't we do high frequency word instruction with them in preschool? And I guess you could, but I would ask you, what's the point really? Like, you know, so, but as a general rule, based on general expectations developmentally and standards documents about what children should be doing by the end of 60 months, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to do high frequency word instruction. Now let's turn to kindergarten. So the position I've taken in kindergarten has been that, and when I say I've taken, it's not just me, lots of people, lots and lots of researchers will say, yeah, teach some high frequency words in kindergarten for sure. I mean, you're not going to get that far in English without knowing THE. I wish you could, but that word is kind of everywhere. So, you know, yeah, teach some high frequency words, but don't go bananas with it. You know, don't teach tons and tons of high frequency words in kindergarten. And it's a lot the same reasons that I just shared with pre-K, but, you know, we're really trying to give them a strong handle on the alphabetic principle and the notion of our fairly predictable English code. So the last thing I want to do when I'm trying to convince them to do the hard work of looking at the letters D-O-G and going dog, like at the moment that I'm trying to get them to do that hard work, I don't want to be sending them messages about reading is memorizing, or, you know, you can't trust the letter sound relationships in words, and taking their attention with reading a bunch of function words that don't do much for us. So I will share with you, that's so funny that's in the chat, Jenny. I was literally just about to, I had pulled up before this meeting just one scope and sequence. It's not the be all and end all, but it's just a scope and sequence that I've been working on for the curriculum, the Great First Aid curriculum that we have coming out. That's free. So I'm not trying to sell anybody anything, but I just wanted to sort of show you how we did high frequency words there. And then I'm going to point you to some other places to look. So these are our high frequency words for kindergarten. So it's not that there are none of them. I hope you can see that. You know, we definitely are teaching high frequency words, but we're not teaching, you know, hundreds of high frequency words. And when we put them together, when we determined, you know, what they would be, one thing we thought about is, you know what, we're going to start with some high frequency words that are decodable based on the letter sound relationships that we've taught. So that early on, you know, they're getting these words that they could just use their developing decoding ability anyway. They could just say and can, you know, or at and, you know, so we're not even, this is our 3rd unit of the year. So we're like 11 weeks into school before we teach our first high frequency word that isn't decodable based on just basic alphabet instruction. So that's pretty far in, right? We're 11 weeks into kindergarten. And even still, you'll see that we keep going with some of our high frequency words that are spelled and pronounced as you would expect. We could argue about get, but I'll hold that off unless anybody in the chat wants to get into the is get decodable or is get not decodable discussion. Now, for the ones that are not decodable based on what children have been taught to date, and again, a little debatable with help, but what I want to show you here is that we didn't sort of pick them at random, right? Like we tried to group them. We thought, oh, let's teach we, me, he, she, and thee all together, because even though, you know, so they have like a common graphophonemic pattern, even though kids will be, you know, well within what they'd learned to date, you could imagine them, you know, saying you know, now that they have these 5 of them and they all do that, and then we follow up with the, which is also pronounced the, but, you know, at least that's sort of a bridge. So we tried to do that when we could, so that even when we're teaching words that are not decodable based on what children have been taught so far, you know, make is certainly decodable, but it's decodable by a consonant, vowel, consonant, E pattern that they're learning in first grade, you know, so even when we're doing words that aren't decodable for them based on what they've been taught so far, we're still trying to be mindful of grouping them in like a thoughtful way that gives children an opportunity to connect them to each other or to other things that we're teaching. And that also, like, they might be exceptions to something we're teaching, that kind of pattern. And meaningful groups like 1, 2, and 3 together. We're still doing that as we create our scope and sequence. So, so that's how I would suggest thinking about kindergarten. Now, I'm not the only person to have a scope and sequence for kindergarten. So if you have a phonics or spelling program, you probably have one that has a scope and sequence, and you could decide whether you want to stick with that scope and sequence or not. You could also look at, you know, Sharon Walpole has a scope and sequence that's part of Bookworms that you can access free online. Devin Kearns, Kearns, has a site that I believe has a kindergarten scope and sequence, or at least it has a scope and sequence where you could kind of slide to see where kindergarten would be. So there are other resources out there. You may also, you know, decide that you want to create sort of your district's own scope and sequence by drawing on several different documents, but I would encourage you to keep in mind the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So the last part of that is first grade. Why do I say that in first grade, we should kind of ramp up the high frequency word instruction? The reason that I say we should ramp up the high frequency word instruction in first grade is because by that point, we've got some things on our side. We know kids, if we've done our jobs, have initial phoneme segmentation, have concepts of word, and have good solid alphabet knowledge. We also know that there are a fair number of texts that kids can now read. And so hopefully we've done our job, which means that they can encounter those high frequency words in context. And high frequency words, to orthographically map those, you know, to do the meaning part of orthographic mapping, because remember, orthographic mapping is not just phonological and the actual written graphemes, it's also meaning, right? It helps us do that with kids if they can read the words in context. So by first grade, there are more texts that kids can read the high frequency words in context. So that's another thing we have going for us in first grade. Another thing we have going for us in first grade is that there's more that they can decode. So there are more high frequency words that have now become decodable to kids. For example, as soon as we've taught consonant, vowel, consonant, E, now we can do like and make and made. And we can also at that point contrast like come, done, none, right? So come, done, none aren't pronounced the way you might expect, but they kind of make this little exception grouping together or whatever you want to call it. And so that's why I think first grade is where we can ramp up that high frequency word instruction. The last thing I'll say about this is just that I think to really wrap your head around these recommendations I'm making, like the big mindset shift here that, you know, we've been working on in the essentials the whole time, but, you know, just, you know, lots of time, it takes a lot of time to make a mindset shift, right? Is that like the task here is not primarily memorization. If you think reading is primarily memorization, it does make a lot of sense to do tons and tons of high frequency word instruction as soon as you can. But if you think the primary task of learning to read and write is really learning this code that you can generalize and transfer to new words, right? And it's not a matter of whole word memorization. That's sort of what helps kick in the understanding of why we'd be slower on the high frequency word instruction. So I'm hoping that helps. Now let me go into the chat where there is so much. Okay. When is it coming out? If you're referring to the Great First 8 curriculum, the official public launch of the website is going to be November 1st. And it's just the infant, the toddler, and the kindergarten that are out on November 1st for districts to consider for adoption in 23-24. And it's free, as I said. And it's really designed for US metropolitan areas and classrooms that have a number of children from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. So it may not be a fit for your particular setting. Thank you, sir. Okay, Bookworms does not advocate teaching blends and digraphs in kindergarten. Would you agree? So first of all, Sharon Walpole is a very close friend of mine. And, we agree on most everything, but there are a few places. So we do teach digraphs in Great First 8 in kindergarten. We don't teach all of them. We don't teach any vowel digraphs. We teach SH, TH, and CH. That's it. Part of our philosophy is those just come up in so many words. And another part of our philosophy there is we think we're giving a set for diversity for children, like getting them used to the idea early on that you can have more than one letter represent a single sound. I don't know if any of you have experienced this. I don't have research on this, but so I'm just talking from my personal experience. But back when I was doing a lot of clinical work with struggling readers back when pterodactyls were flying over the earth, we would have kids where they seemed to be stuck was making the transition from one letter, one sound to multiple letters, one sound. I don't know if any of you have encountered kids where that's just like a tough, it's sort of like they think they got the world figured out and then all of a sudden you're just blowing their mind. And so that's part of why I really like that we do those three big digraphs in consonant digraphs, I should be saying, consonant digraphs in kindergarten. But I can certainly respect a different point of view on that as well. In terms of blends, first of all, I've been trying to use the term consonant clusters more because the term blends can be a little confusing. But in terms of consonant clusters, we do actually tackle those in our scope and sequence toward the end of kindergarten. And just kind of introduce them. And then we actually start first grade with them. So we're kind of right on the edge of, end of kindergarten, early first to work on those consonant clusters. So there's that. You may have heard there's some folks out there in the field who say like, don't teach those. Like there's no reason to teach them because you can just figure them out by just making the sound of each letter, right? Like don't teach FL fool, just have kids go fool. And I agree that you should definitely have kids sound out the cluster, not try to like memorize just FL, but like know that inside FL is ooh. But I do think they're worthy of instructional attention. There's quite a bit of evidence that they're challenging for kids and, getting those sounds to blend together, especially for children who have put too much at the end. Like if you're trying to do like TR, right? Like a common way kids will get stuck is they want to say like to you know what I mean? So like for various reasons, I do think that consonant clusters are worthy of instructional attention, and most interventions that I'm aware of, do spend time on consonant clusters. So I'm not, you definitely should teach them. But the question of where is obviously open for debate. For me, it's, like I said, very end of kindergarten, beginning of first. Oh boy. Oh my goodness. Okay. Scope and sequence of data. Oh, thank you, Annie. That's really helpful. Annie's got something in the chat about where you can look to find the scope and sequence of phonological awareness and word recognition in the book, How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction, which probably a lot of you have. Oh, sorry. The curriculum is called Great First 8 curriculum for the first 8 years of life. Do you recommend based on research?
Now, can I interrupt you really quickly too? So the scope and sequence that you shared with us today, that's not something we can see yet until November 1st, but on November 1st, we'll be able to see it. Is that what you're telling? Just
Yes, you have to go through a bunch of steps to get access to see it. But
Okay.
yes, that is right. I can probably share it at that point with you all directly so that you wouldn't have to go through all the steps if your district wasn't interested in Great First Aid or wasn't a fit for Great First Aid. So if you remind me after November 1st, I can kind of put that together and share it. Not that it's the
Put it-
be all and end all. It's just our, it's just what we think based on our review of the research and so forth, and our
Thank
own
you.
experiences and so forth. Thank you. Okay. Do you recommend, based on research, of course, that a school districts use a variety of ELA curricular resources or a single comprehensive one? Great question, Erin Powell. I don't know of research on this. So I don't know the answer to your question. I think the more important question is probably twofold. The first is, are you hitting everything you need to hit? So if you've got an ELA curriculum that doesn't have phonemic awareness or phonics instruction in it, then definitely research would suggest that you need to get another resource in addition. You know what I mean? So I think I'd base it more on, do you go through the curriculum or curricula you have and find all the essential instructional practices in there? If they're all in one curriculum, you can use one curriculum. If they're not all in one curriculum, then you're going to have to use multiple resources. And then the second thing I would think about is just efficiency of time. So I know that some of you know that I am disconcerted, as are many researchers that I know, by a pattern in the US right now in which teachers have one curriculum for phonemic awareness and another curriculum for phonics and spelling, and they're teaching them separately and devoting time to each one. That's not consistent with our understanding of the research, which suggests that phonemic awareness instruction is most effective when it's accompanied by letters. So for me, if what we're talking about is a bunch of different ELA curricular resources and you've got phonics and spelling separated from phonemic awareness and two different resources for that, that's worrisome for me based on my understanding of research, and I think also worrisome for many researchers. So sorry, Erin, that I can't give a clearer answer to that, but I think those two things that I shared are the two things I would look at. Are you getting all the essentials covered in whatever resource or resources you have? And are you making sure that time is being used efficiently and in a way that's consistent with research? We do a lesson from Ebley with the words up, tea, earn, and way to showcase that all of these words have two sounds, but there can be anywhere from 1 to 4 letters to make the sound. And that is, in fact, true. That we have, the technical term is quad graphs. So we have quad graphs in English, right? We have situations in which 4 letters work together to make a single sound. So that is true. True. Are there any studies that we should point? Yeah, great question, Mary Blummer from MAISD. In the chat at 2:40 for people who are looking. That is a really good question about high frequency word instruction and talking with administrators. So one of the things you have to look at here is really what your assessments are, because a lot of times when principals are pushing for a particular practice, it's because they want to see test scores go up. And here we run into a problem that, to be frank, is really, really a problem for me right now in the field, which is that there are all of these assessments that have on them high frequency words. And so if the high frequency words on the assessment don't match the high frequency words you've taught, then your kids will look like they're not reading as well, when really it's just that they're reading a different set of high frequency words. And it's exceedingly frustrating because the assessments that do this, beyond lack of alignment to your scope and sequence, often what high frequency words they've picked, it's very hard to provide a rationale. For example, one of them, I can't actually even remember which one it was, but one of the high frequency words is people. Now, people is not a great choice for a high frequency words for our young learners. First of all, it's not that common. That comes, we could get all into it, but like where the Dolch and Fry word lists originally came from, at the time that those lists were developed, we had a different theory going about how children even learn to read. And so therefore the books, think Dick, Jane, Spot type thing, totally different kinds of books, which led to different kinds of words being highly frequent. Anyway, just people is not that highly frequent a word anymore in what little kids are reading in the first couple grades of school, right? Plus, people is just a frustrating word from, a phonics instruction point of view. You have to have taught the LE syllable, which I don't know about you, but we don't typically teach LE syllable until, certainly the second half of first grade. So you've got that, unless you're not going to teach it, and it's multisyllabic, and you've got that weird EO, which isn't really worth your time, and it on and on. But it's like these assessments feel like they're forcing us into teaching the word people before we would think, using our wisdom, that it would be the time to teach people. But then, I myself here from then the principals want to know why the kids' scores aren't higher on the high frequency word assessment, reading assessment, or whatever assessment, if it's one of these multifaceted assessments like NWEA or iRead or something, where that's like one part of a much larger assessment, still it can affect kids' scores. I don't have an easy answer to this, except to say that in my opinion, we have to get back to a place where our primary emphasis and assessment is alignment of the assessment to what we've actually taught. I have no idea how to get the country back to that place, because we're so far from that place right now. But that to me is the issue there. So how to talk to administrators, I think it's like, I hate to say it, but it's as concrete as like, here, these are the words that we teach in kindergarten. Now, here are the words in the Acadience assessment. Can you see the difference between the words in the Acadience assessment and the words we've taught? Yes, I can. Well, we've chosen to teach these words for these good reasons, and Acadience has chosen to include these words for we're not sure why. And this is why you're seeing what you're seeing. How would you feel if I did an assessment on 10 kids in each classroom using the actual words we've taught? And just see if you can kind of get around it that way. Sorry, again. Someone else has a magical answer to this, I'd love to hear it, because it's coming up for me actually quite a bit. Any advice, research, or thoughts for schools looking to implement a new curriculum? Great question. So I'm going to take two different angles on that question. So the first is on the picking the curriculum part, and then the second is on the implementing the curriculum part. So on the picking the curriculum part, so for me, and I think for a lot of folks, a good curriculum sits at the intersection of depending on how you count them, 3 or 4 bubbles. And some of you many years ago saw, I think it was Tanya Wright and I present something along these lines. But one bubble is usability. If a curriculum is too complicated to be actually usable by teachers, then that's a problem for a curriculum. A second is standards alignment. Does the curriculum actually address the things that we're accountable for teaching? That's an important bubble. And then there's a research alignment bubble. I'm sure you can guess that I think the research alignment bubble is a very important bubble. Does the curriculum reflect what we understand to be effective practice, appropriate expectations for children, etc. Now, the fourth bubble to me is responsiveness. Does the curriculum allow us to be responsive to children with different profiles, children from different socioeconomic backgrounds, children from different cultural backgrounds, children with different linguistic backgrounds, children with different interests, things that they're interested in reading about, that all of that stuff that falls into responsiveness. And the reason I say it's arguable whether that's a separate bubble is, in my opinion, that's all research supported. So you could either include all that in research alignment, or you could make a separate bubble for it, if that makes sense. Anyway, so when you're picking a curriculum, those are the 4 things that, in my opinion, you need to think about. So there are some resources out there. One that's getting the most attention by far is Ed Reports, that look at standards alignment and look at usability, but they don't necessarily look at research alignment. And so that is a heavier lift. You can certainly look in places like What Works Clearinghouse and Google Scholar, but the challenge is that by the time we've actually researched curricula, they're often like out of date from a standards perspective. Do you know what I mean? Like it takes a long time to get a big, robust research base on a curriculum. There are exceptions, and actually Bookworms is an exception. There's already, data to suggest that Bookworms is an effective curriculum in research, but that's kind of rare that happens. So you can look at the What Works Clearinghouse, you can look in Google Scholar, but the most likely scenario is that you're going to have to go piece by piece through the curriculum and look at it for alignment to research. And there are tools for doing that. The Southeast Regional Education Lab, Southeast REL, has a tool for looking at curricula with that lens. And many of you know that we've advocated using the essentials that way. You take the essentials and you take the curriculum and you go point by point and you see. So if the essentials say that you need to have an opportunity for children to read texts in which they can apply the graphophonemic information that they've recently been taught, and you're looking at a curriculum and it doesn't have texts that are decodable based on what children have been taught to date, that's probably an issue, right? So you kind of go bullet by bullet through the essentials. I know this is tedious, but to, see its alignment. And I think you can also, look around at what people are recommending. For example, some of you might know that on the Knowledge Matters website, the knowledgematterscampaign.org, they have identified 6 curricula that they think are well worth looking at. So, if you trust Knowledge Matters, then that can be something you look at. I'm on the scientific advisory board for Knowledge Matters, but the scientific advisory board isn't the part of Knowledge Matters that picked the 6 curricula. So I'm not saying I endorse all 6. I'm just saying that's a place where, people who've thought a lot about curriculum have the Knowledge Matters core team have, identified 6 curricula that I think are worth looking at. So that's all on the picking the curriculum or curricula side of the equation. In terms of the implementation side, because Lauren's question there did say looking to implement a new curriculum. So the implementing part, and here, I know you all know this, but, you need that curriculum aligned professional learning. So, teachers should not be walking in the first day of school with a brand new curriculum without having gotten a good chunk of professional learning about that curriculum and how to implement it. And, that's just crucial as just a starting point. And then you're providing coaching that's informed by your knowledge of the curriculum materials. That's really important. Like that's one of the, I think, positive aspects of our coaching model is that, coaches are specializing in usually just a school or a few schools. And so they can get to know the curriculum very well or curricula very well that are being used in that school. And that makes you a more effective coach, most likely. So, so that's really important. Asking administrators for grace and patience is really important because we know that being good, well, I shouldn't say we know that. I think the conventional wisdom is, and there's some research to suggest, it takes teachers about 3 years to get really good at implementing a curriculum. So, you can't go in October of the first year using a curriculum and expect it to be, the best possible implementation. Just in general, this is not everyone in the field shares this point of view, but a strong point of view, I think, within our essentials and with our literacy coaching network has always been that no curriculum, no matter how wonderful, and I'm saying this as a curriculum writer, by the way, no curriculum is by itself really going to move the needle for children's achievement without teachers who are, well-versed in that curriculum, how to use it, have that deep professional knowledge, are given opportunities to be responsive to the kids in front of them, etc. So, trying to disabuse anybody in the district with the idea that a curriculum change is the answer, or, M-STEP is scores are just going to fly up as soon as we, adopt a new curriculum, to really be in it for the longer haul. Lauren, I hope that helps. That was kind of a mouthful. And I think I'm supposed to stop 1 minute before right now. Is that correct? So I stopped. Let me say that in a more coherent way. I think I was supposed to stop 1 minute ago. Well, so I'm sorry, I probably didn't get to every, I clearly did not. get to every question, but I hope this was a little bit helpful, and I'm so glad to have a chance to interact with you all. And I also love your questions because they always, give me a chance to think, and thinking is good. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Now, this was just like such excellence, and just the informality was, I think, what everybody needed. And the fact that we could just listen to all of the knowledge that you have in your brain, and that you so like fluently and flexibly can gather it all together and answer these questions, is just awe-inspiring. So thank you, because I was trying to furiously take notes, but I think we'll be rewatching this a lot. So thank you. And you're getting so many things thanking you.
Well,
I
thank you. I'd like if you rewatch it to try to imagine that I had more body in my hair.
You
That it
look
didn't
great.
just look like
It's
a
so long. I like
completely,
it.
what is this? I don't know what happens. Anyway, thank
Oh.
you, everybody.
I think it's beautiful. And a quick question, there were some questions on orthographic mapping. Would it be helpful, you think, to share the latest linear area studies and put those in for people to be able to look at about the phoneme?
Yeah, absolutely. She has a really nice piece in the reading teacher last year that I really
Yes.
enjoyed
Okay.
as well. So for sure, yeah, you definitely want to know about orthographic mapping. We also talk about it in the modules, I believe. I'm not sure we use that term, but I think we do. So anyway, yeah, check that out for sure. Thank you.
Okay.